Hey guys, Mark here. I hope you're doing well. In today's video, I'm going to demonstrate how to do the Flemish flake. So first off, what is a Flemish flake? Essentially, it is a coiled piece of rope which we stitch on the underside, and this produces a mat. This sort of a mat can then be used under hot dishes on the table. It can be used to place your shoes onto it, or you can use it to stand on. So it has a number of applications, but essentially it is a rope mat. Now in the past, I have considered this style to be something that a lazy person would make. All it is a coil stitched together. Now, usually, what I make is a mat out of rope, which is basically a knot. All a Flemish flake is a coil of rope stitched together. So why would you even consider making one? Well, it has a unique look to it, and this is the appeal of the Flemish flake. It is a coiled piece, and it has a circular kind of a look. You would think that the Flemish flake is much faster to do than, for example, a rope mat. Now, coiling the rope is not an issue, but stitching it up together is something that requires some time. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that the Flemish flake is no less demanding than making a rope mat. While in the rope mat, you spend time tightening up the knot and adjusting everything, in the Flemish flake, you take the time to stitch everything together. The time to make a rope mat like this, or a rope mat in the Flemish flake form, is about the same. So you make this one for the look, and in my opinion, it looks quite nice. I can definitely see this as a gift or as something I would place on a table under a hot dish. With this said, let's start our tutorial. The supplies for making the Flemish flake are pretty much the same as with any rope mat. So the first supply that you're going to need is some sort of cordage. Now in my case, I prefer to use natural cordages, but you can choose to use artificial ones as well. Old climbing rope is very popular for making rope mats. Now in my case, I'm going to choose one of these 4 cordages. So we have hemp, cotton, sisal, and manila. Now for this project, I'm going to be using sisal, and the diameter of my rope is going to be about 5/16 of an inch. So about 8 millimeters. You can use thicker rope or thinner rope. The rope diameter is really important in the case of the Flemish flake. The larger the diameter of your rope, the less coiling you're going to have to do to achieve a certain diameter. The less coils that you have also means less stitching that you're going to have to do. So I absolutely recommend choosing a nice balance of rope diameter and the size of the mat that you want to do. The larger the mat, so the larger the Flemish flake, the larger the diameter of the rope you should use. Otherwise, it's going to take you too long to stitch up a single flake. For my project, I'm going to be using about 10 feet of rope, about 5/16 of an inch in diameter, so 8 millimeters. Now, the mat that we're going to end up with is going to be about 8 inches in diameter. This is a nice table mat that you can use under hot dishes. A larger mat is naturally going to require either more cordage or a thicker piece of cordage to attain a larger diameter. The next supply that you're going to need is going to be thread and needle. This pair is going to be used in order to stitch together the flake. It is important that the thread is strong enough to hold together the flake, and my recommendation is that the color of the thread is complementary to the color of cord that you're using. So these two go together quite well. We are also going to use our thread in order to secure the ends of our rope. So we're going to add a couple of whippings using our thread. And finally, you're going to need something to cut your rope with. Either scissors or a knife. With these supplies gathered up, we can finally begin making our Flemish flake. After cutting a length of rope, it is time to secure the ends. This will prevent them from unraveling and the rope from coming undone. Now the easiest way to do this would be to tape up the ends. But in my opinion, taping up an end looks a bit sloppy. It is much better to add a couple of whippings which fit into the project much better. To do my whippings, I'm going to take 2 pieces of thread and secure each end with one of the threads. For this purpose, for this demonstration that is, I'm going to be using red thread. This will make things easier to see. As mentioned before, it is best to select a color of thread that is complementary to the color of rope that you're using for this Flemish flake. There are many styles of whippings that you can make. Some are more secure than others, and some are more decorative than others. Here we're going to do the simplest of them all, the common whipping. Now, I've cut a thread about 3 to 4 feet in length. I usually don't measure up my thread, but just estimate by looking at the thread. But generally, I think it is between 3 and 4 feet long. I'm going to fold an end like this into a bight. I'm going to place this bight over the end of my rope. Then using my long end, I'm going to start wrapping around over the bight. As you can see, I'm traveling towards the left side and wrapping over the bight. Make sure that your turns so the wraparounds are neatly lined up. This is going to result in a nice looking whipping. After you feel that you have a nice length of wraparounds, take your working hand and feed it through the bight on the left side. So through it like this. Then pull in the bight using this strand on the right until you get this left end to about the middle point in your whipping. So pull in. Something like this. Then pull on both of the ends to secure the whipping. At this point, you can trim the two ends and you have secured this end of your rope. Do the other one as well, and then we're going to continue. After securing both ends of my rope, it is time to start stitching the flake. For the stitching process, I'm again going to be using red thread to make things easier to see. Now, as far as the thread goes, I'm going to cut a length that I'm comfortable working with. I'm not going to stitch the entire mat with a single piece of thread, but with a shorter one, and when I run out, I'm simply going to cut another length and continue. So cut a thread of a comfortable length, and let's begin. First off, what we're going to do is thread our needle and tie an overhand knot on the other side of my thread just to help us lock it into place. Like this. Now we're going to start stitching. Now there are several stitches that you can use in order to stitch together such a flake. I'm going to show you the herringbone stitch. Now for you to be able to easily learn the herringbone stitch, I'm first going to show you how to do it on a piece of cloth. So we start off with our thread coming out of the cloth at some point. We're going to travel to the other side, which we want to join to this one, and we're going to do a simple back stitch. Then travel back to the side where you came from, and again do a back stitch. And again to the other side, doing a back stitch. And again to the other side, so the side where we came from. A back stitch. And continue the same way. Practice this stitch a little bit just to make your job a bit easier when we're doing our actual stitching. I'm going to start stitching by coiling my rope a little bit. I want to start my stitching here, so right next to my whipping, and using this strand here, and this strand going right around it. So I'm going to attach my thread here, right next to the whipping. To attach my thread, I pass through my rope, pull my thread through, then pass through my rope for a second time, pull my thread through, and this way I have secured my thread onto my rope. After attaching our thread onto this outer strand of our rope, we're going to try to stitch the outer strand onto the inner one. We're going to do a back stitch right next to our whipping, going under one of the strands in our rope. So we do a back stitch traveling from the right side to the left. Like this. Then travel back to the side where we came from, and again do a back stitch. So under one of the strands in our rope, like this. Then back to the other side, so the inner side of our rope. And again, under one of the strands, doing a back stitch. And again, to the side where we came from, under one of the strands in our rope, and back to the inner side, doing a back stitch. And again to the side where we came from, under one of the strands in the rope, and back to the inner side. So this is pretty much all we're doing. A herringbone stitch connecting the inner and outer side. And as you can see, when we're stitching, we're also coiling our rope around and around. Continue coiling and stitching until you stitch up the entire flake. When you begin to run out of your thread, what we're going to do is add a final stitch like this. Then simply go through your rope for a second time. Just to lock it off. Now at this point, you have a ton of options. You can do a few more wraparounds, going through your rope again. You can travel with your end under the wraparounds. Basically, you can play around. The trick is just to lock off the end in a secure way. After you have done this, usually what I do is run it through a couple of more strands of rope. Then trim it. This is just one way. The important thing is that you lock off the end in a secure way. Then you simply start with a new thread exactly the same way that we started. So you start exactly the same way, first locking off one end of your thread. Then continuing with your stitch. And just keep going. When you come to the very end of your rope, what we're going to do is make a final stitch. Then we're going to lock off the thread. Like this. Maybe work it in a bit deeper into our flake. And then trim it. With this, our flake is complete. Now, if you do your stitching in a complementary color, it's not going to really stand out. And this is how your top side should look like. After stitching together the Flemish flake, you have several more options of improving its look. But generally it is complete. Now to improve its look, the first thing that you can do is to cut off any stray fibers sticking out of your rope. We call rope with fairly loose fibers hairy rope because, well, it looks like a bunch of hairs sticking out of your rope. Now the second thing that you can do is to take a plank and rub it over the top of your flake to flatten it out. This gives your flake a more uniform look. So guys, with this, our Flemish flake is finally complete. I hope that you're going to use it in order to beautify your home or as a gift for a loved one. Thank you very much for joining me in this tutorial, and I hope to see you next time.